So I think we can start now. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture. My name is Florian Kübler, and on behalf of the German Commission for UNESCO, I welcome you to the digital lecture series Together for Change, Shaping Transformation Sustainably, which is held on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the UNESCO Chairs Program. This lecture series is organized by the German Commission for UNESCO together with our 15 German UNESCO chairs. And before we start, I would like to do some brief technical announcements. The lecture is recorded and live streamed on YouTube in parallel. And after this short introduction, Professor Lang from Leuphana University Lüneburg will take over for about 45 to 60 minutes. And so there will be time afterwards to ask questions and discuss the topics raised by Professor Lang. And asking questions is only possible via Zoom and not on YouTube. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function or the chat at the bottom of your Zoom window, and feel free to write down your questions already during the lecture so that we may have an overview or combine questions at the end, which makes it easier to start the discussion immediately. Some brief words to the background of the lecture series. As said before, this lecture series is happening due to the 30th anniversary of the UNESCO Chairs Program, which was founded in 1992 and currently consists of more than 900 UNESCO chairs worldwide. UNESCO chairs are think tanks who help us to cope with urgent challenges of our modern global world, and they act as bridges between science, civil society, local communities, research, and politics. In Germany, there are currently 15 UNESCO chairs with very diverse research areas and thematic scopes. However, they all come together under the umbrella of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And with this lecture series, they introduce us to their different disciplinary approaches to implementing the Agenda 2030 and how they become active together for change. Today's lecture is held by Professor Daniel Lang from the UNESCO Chair in Higher Education for Sustainable Development at Leuphana University Lüneburg. And since 2005, the UNESCO Chair at Leuphana University has been explicitly dedicated to the question of how students can be taught an understanding of science that has sustainability as a guiding principle and shows how important responsible decisions in research and education are in view of the complexity of challenges and the consequences of decisions for society and the environment. Beyond this understanding, fundamental sustainability competencies are also important, which shall allow future change agents to actively engage in the search for and implementation of solution options for sustainability challenges. And in this sense, we are now excited and very much looking forward to hear from you, Professor Lange, on the matter of transdisciplinary learning to foster local SDG implementation in today's lecture. Once again, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us today. And now without any further delay, I hand over to you. So please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Florian, and thanks for everybody joining, at least for the ones joining from Europe at such a late time in the day. I know that this is also for you kind of you had already an entire workday and now 60 minutes of listening. So I try to combine a bit of more conceptual theoretical work, but then mainly dig into different examples. I also have towards the end, as I know that one will get tired towards the end. I also have included 2 videos. So I hope that it is at least a bit exciting for you as well. The second thing I want to mention before I start this presentation is that I am presenting today, but at the end of the day, this is the work of many people, and I can't and I'm not able to mention all of them, but it's really a fantastic work of the team at the Institute for Sustainable Development and Learning, where this UNESCO chair is embedded, among others, Deepika Yon, who did a wonderful job to really promote this lecture. It's Lina Bürgener, who is kind of contributing to a lot of work. Then we have Stefanie Traut, who has also contributed. The team of Lüneburg 2030 Plus. So it's really a big team that really created what I present today. So I'm only the presenter, but kind of the people who have really made this happen is much more. It's the entire team of ISDL. And There is also kind of a long tradition, as Florian already mentioned, of this UNESCO chair. And I'm only kind of the chairholder for the last 1.5 years. And before that, it was Gerd Michelsen, and Gerd Michelsen was strongly supported by a team, among others, Matthias Barth, with whom I also collaborated and created ISDL together with Gerd. So many things I report on the UNESCO chair, and that the UNESCO chair is also not my major merit, but it's the merit also of others. So, but what do I want to talk about today? I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And it is about transdisciplinary learning to foster local SDG implementation, and really try to explore what this means, transdisciplinary learning, and why I think particularly the local implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals are of utmost importance. So probably most of you know the Sustainable Development Goals that were implemented in 2015. Here is kind of a picture of the resolution. And it really was meant to be a transformative agenda. So it really was about transforming our world, the 2030 agenda as it reads here. And I read kind of the preamble today and the major goals. And, you know, in this dire time we are currently living in, where we are facing war, where we just came out of a pandemic, it was really very nice to read what kind of the different people and kind of the leaders of so many nations agreed upon in 2030. And I think it's still of utmost importance what was written there. And as part of this, agenda for sustainable development, the 2030 agenda, these 17 goals have been formulated, ranging from no poverty to the partnership for the goals. And we also have here peace, justice, and strong institutions, which I think is today a goal that is more relevant than ever. So we are almost in the midst of this agenda, and now kind of the not so nice news starts. So there recently have been a study of colleagues who went through 3,000 scientific studies on the Sustainable Development Goals and tried to figure out, well, what was the impact of the Sustainable Development Goals on the political agendas and on policies in different areas. And I know that it's very little to read kind of the abstract. Maybe it's also not too bad, but kind of the major conclusion is here. So we conclude that the scientific evidence suggests only limited transformative political impact of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is sad, and this is kind of one of the major challenges, I think. It's really the challenge how to navigate this sustainability transformation we envision, and that is kind of in the heart of the 2030 agenda in a complex world and in diverse contexts. So we want to not only implement it in Germany, but around the globe. And as I already said, I think the last 3.5 years haven't really made it easier to navigate kind of the sustainability transformation. I think all of us know kind of the numbers of the COVID pandemics. We have seen this in the news over the last 2.5 years again and again. This is the City Hall of Lüneburg, but you see kind of that it's the flag of Ukraine. We're living in times where we have in the midst of Europe, we have a war, and climate change, and this is clearly indicated by the last IPCC reports, is really a major challenge that threatens the entire humanity, the existence of humanity on this planet. And there are other crises like the loss of biodiversity, etc., etc., etc. We can continue on that. So the question really is, this is a complex world. Already the predecessor of the 2030 agenda said that we need to think globally and we need to act locally. So it's really this question: how can we navigate these sustainability transitions with the global goals, but in acting locally? So what I wanted to do today is threefold. So first, what I already said, I want to briefly explore why I think that transdisciplinary learning, the idea of transdisciplinary learning, can provide us processes and ways to really learn for this transformation and understand this transformation as a learning process on different levels. Then in the second part, I really want to go into two examples, mainly one example, which is the example of Lüneburg 2030 Plus, where we worked in and still work in a real world laboratory. And I really want to show you how this research and learning settings of real world laboratories can be places to foster transdisciplinary learning. And at the end, I want to dig a bit deeper into 2 or 3 success factors of transdisciplinary learning in real-world laboratory settings, to also give you an idea, A, on the one hand side of our current research related to real-world laboratories and transdisciplinary learning, and B, also to hopefully give you some ideas if you want to kind of in the one way or the other want to also engage in transdisciplinary learning exercises where might be pitfalls, but also most importantly, how you can make kind of the real world laboratories or your real world laboratory success. So first, if we say that a major challenge is really to navigate through this complex world and really navigate a sustainability transformation in a complex world, then the question is, well, what are requirements that we can do that? And I think one requirement is that we need to co-produce action-oriented knowledge. So I am a researcher at a university, and the question really is, well, what type of knowledge is needed if you really want to contribute to this transformation? And in a paper that was published in 2021, led by Guido Caniglia, I'm also one of the co-authors of this paper. We asked the question, well, many people talk about this action-oriented knowledge, but how can we really better understand what action-oriented knowledge is? And for doing so, we first asked the question, and we went through the literature and asked, well, what are characteristics of actions for sustainability? And you see here that there are 3 actions that we have identified in the literature. That is, on the one hand side, actions for sustainability are intentionally designed. So it's really, often people ask me, are you doing normative research? And yes, I'm doing normative research because I'm doing research to foster sustainable development. So it's not that we just have the actions coming from somewhere, but it's actions to really foster sustainability. The next one is that a single person or a single actor won't implement sustainability. Therefore, actions for sustainability involve shared agency. So it's really a joint effort. It's shared agency of multiple actors developed through social interactions. And finally, and there we come back, why this local is so important. It's not on the abstract level that change happens, but really these actions are contextually realized. That means it's often a different action that we need in Lüneburg if we compare it, for instance, to Singapore, Penang, or Addis Ababa. So we really have different context conditions that we need to consider if we want to have effective actions towards sustainability. So if we then come to action-oriented knowledge, and I can't go through all of the characteristics of action-oriented knowledge, but just to give you an idea, if we take this seriously, we also need a different type of knowledge, or knowledge that has different characteristics than purely abstract empirical knowledge that we usually generate in science. So on the one hand side, it's strategic. So also there we have talked, or I have talked about intentional design. So it's really knowledge that has a strategic purpose to foster, support actions towards sustainability. It's co-created, so it's not one institution or one dimension of knowledge that creates this type of knowledge, but it's really acknowledging that there are different domains of knowledge. And yes, disciplinary knowledge, different disciplines have an important contribution, but there is, for instance, also indigenous knowledge. That is, if we really want to implement sustainability, also a relevant type of knowledge that needs to be considered. And it's really about this interaction and the co-creation of knowledge. And finally, and you have this also here, that is closely linked to the contextual realization, this knowledge is situated. So it's also context-dependent knowledge that acknowledges the situatedness of the place where it was produced. A second requirement, and there I built on work of Donella Meadows, and this is a paper that we have published in 2017, following the idea of Donella Meadows of leverage points for system change. And the main argument, and we don't have the time to go through in detail these different leverage points, but the main argument that Donella Meadows in 1999 made was that our main focus, if we think about system change, is often on material changes or on processes, optimizing processes, making processes more efficient, maybe find different materials to fulfill the same function. And her argument is, if we really want to have fundamental system change, if we really want to have transformative change, then we also need to think about the design and the intent of systems. So it's really about what are the goals that we are following? What are the fundamental paradigms that our societies are built on? And this is where, on the one hand side, policies don't really cope with most often, and it's also where we have not a lot of knowledge. Also in the scientific realm, we often focus on the more shallow leverage points. So transdisciplinarity, I think I thought it's useful to, at least if we talk about transdisciplinary learning, at least have a definition of transdisciplinarity. And the key idea of transdisciplinarity is to really change perspective in science. And it doesn't neglect disciplinary research, and it does also not neglect interdisciplinary research, or say that transdisciplinary research is better than other type of research. It really depends on the research question. But the core idea of transdisciplinary research really is to depart from a societal problem and then engage in a mutual learning process between different actors from other societal domains than science, and scientific actors, bring them together to really work on this societal problem, formulate a joint research question, engage in a co-creation of solution-oriented knowledge, and then at the end of the day, really reintegrate this knowledge to produce, on the one hand side, societal impact, but on the other hand side, also new insights, new scientific insights that then help us in the next in the next iteration to address other problems, etc., etc. So it's really this idea that it's a mutual learning between different domains, different knowledge domains, to produce both impact, societal impacts, to at least transform the societal problem that we are facing, and on the other hand side, also generate new knowledge. So, and this is the short commercial, the only one of today. So if you want to learn more about transdisciplinarity together with colleagues, I also saw Claire Kauer in the list. I think she works in the TD Academy. www.td/academy.org. This is a platform that we have now built up for the last couple of years to really exchange on transdisciplinarity, bring the transdisciplinarity community together. So if you're interested in transdisciplinarity, please join the TD Academy. So, and now transdisciplinary learning. What is transdisciplinary learning? The key idea of transdisciplinary learning, at least from my perspective, is to engage in transformation or to foster transformation through learning processes. And learning processes on different levels. So it's on the one hand side, on the individual level, and there it's about individual competency development, enabling people to really engage in these transformations. On a group level, it is about experience-based collaboration, so really learning as a group in communities of practice to really tackle these societal challenges we are facing. And on a societal level, it is about societal interaction to really generate beyond the specific projects, really contribute to societal change. And the people coming more from the educational side or from the management side probably know this concept of single loop, double loop, and triple loop learning. So it's not only learning in a given setting, so following the rules and changing actions that you're doing, but it's also about double loop learning, so learning to learn, changing purposes of systems, and then there we already link again to the idea of the Nello Meadows. And finally, it's also triple loop learning. That means changing the rules and change in synergies. And this is this idea of transdisciplinary learning really embedded in concrete societal settings on these different levels, individual, group, and societal level, and in the interaction. And you will see this in the concrete example, that it's also the interaction of these different levels, in so doing through transdisciplinary learning, foster and contribute to transformation. And where can this happen? And there, and this is also not a lecture on real-world laboratories, but as we now will in a second dive into one real-world laboratory, I at least want to mention it. So this idea of real-world laboratories is to really create settings, research settings in the real world, in cities. So you will in a second see this in Lüneburg, but there is also a long-standing real-world laboratory, for instance, in Karlsruhe and in other places. Others call it urban living labs. So it's really this idea, creating places where actors from different societal domains can really learn and do research together to foster transformations. So, and to not have this on the super abstract level as it was now, as I promised, I now want to give you an impression of the real-world laboratory Lüneburg 2030 Plus, Lüneburg die Zukunftsstadt. And Lüneburg die Zukunftsstadt, you know, has a longer history. So there is already since a very long time a good collaboration between the university, actors from civil society, from different areas of civil society in Lüneburg, and the city administration in Lüneburg. But this project, funded by the Ministry for Education and Research as a competition, started in 2015, which was also the date where the SDGs were announced. And it was really structured as a competition where different communities together with scientific partners could go for this competition. And we had the luck that together with the city and the civil society actors went through all of the 3 phases of this competition. So in the first phase, and we will then later come back to this, how in which educational setting we have done this. In the first phase, it was really about developing a vision or visions for Lüneburg. And here in Lüneburg, we worked together with 700 students, 200 plus citizens, and created in a research-based learning setting, created 25 visions for Lüneburg. So this is the different areas where we, it was, for instance, about democracy, it was about culture in Lüneburg, etc., etc. And then we brought this together in a map of the Lüneburg visions. So this was the first phase. And then in the second phase, the question really was, and it was not that many communities anymore. The question was really, well, how can we come closer to this vision? What would be measures in Lüneburg? They were then called Lüneburg ideas. How can we really, what are ideas, measures to really come closer to these visions? And also there we worked together with several seminars. We had 7 workshops, 450 citizens who collaborated. And it was really then this idea of 17 Lüneburg ideas that we later translated in concrete experiments. We used the gamification approach. So you see this here. This was the game we played in these different workshops. And out of the workshops, these Lüneburg ideas emerge. And then, and this is the phase we are currently in, unfortunately, we are already leaning towards the end. We translated these 17 experiments, these 17 Lüneburg ideas into 15 experiments. And the key idea of this experiment really is to try out these measures, to try out if they work, what can we learn from these different measures, and we're using this idea of experiments, which also include kind of the possibility of failure, try to see which are the pathways towards, at the end of the day, one vision, which is then the vision of the Zukunftsstadt Lüneburg. To get a bit more concrete, even more concrete, here's an example of one concrete experiment out of this 15, which is favorite places. And the key idea of this experiment was to really say, well, there are many places in Lüneburg, but I think in all cities we know that are currently not really using their full potential. And full potential means being places where people can meet, where people can exchange, but where they also contribute to face climate change, for instance, to increase the green spaces in a city. So this was the key idea of the favorite places, to identify places in Lüneburg that haven't really used their full potential of contributing to some of the SDGs, and then doing experiments and try out which measures could be helpful to really make them more favorite places for the citizens of Lüneburg. And this is how we prepared this experiment, and this experiment was strongly prepared by students in collaboration with actors from city department, but also with many civil society actors. One particular actor that we have, for one of the places, have closely collaborated with was, for instance, the theater in Lüneburg. So, and it started with the starting week. where students at Leuphana have 1 week and they do a small experiment and then create videos, and they created videos about possible favorite places in Lüneburg. Then there was an entire semester, and I will show you the way how the responsibility module is structured at Lüneburg, where the first semester students do a project throughout the entire semester. And there the students asked about, well, what are well-being factors of favorite places? How can we evaluate livability, etc., etc. And based on this student preparatory work, in collaboration with different actors from civil society and city administration, at 3 places in Lüneburg. The third place is to be started, but at 3 places. So this is the theater, the place in front of the theater. Really, the experiment started. So there was a greening of the place in front of the theater in Lüneburg. There were several events. And the nice thing for the theater in Lüneburg is that now the theater is carrying this forward, and also the city administration already had ideas how to keep some of the changes. Another place where we had huge controversies about the experiment was a parking lot before, and then for this time was no longer a parking place in Lüneburg, and also there different events took place, so different measures to change the place took place. There already the political discussion is now starting how to change this place, and the third place, as I said, is to be started. It's not yet really started, but I think that's really nice to see this core idea of experiment. So it's an intervention. There were also evaluations about the experiment, and now the question is how the insights can be carried forward, both from here, in this case it's the theater, from civil society actors, or from city administration, or from the university. So the second experiment, youth participation, is also experiment. And I took the experiments where students played a role or a major role for today's session, because it's in this UNESCO, and I am the UNESCO chair for higher education for sustainable development. But there are also other experiments that were more strongly guided and governed by city administration or by civil society actors. But this experiment, youth participation, the original idea was really to involve young people more strongly into the political decision making, the political process. It was planned that their own conference should take place. But during the setup of the experiment, it became clear that there is already a future conference in Lüneburg that has a longer tradition, a youth conference on the future of Lüneburg. And then this experiment evolved that the students, together with different actors from city administration, but also other actors, really say, well, we don't invent a new conference because this already exists and it's already successful. But the key question was really, how can we engage more people into this conference? And the second question was, well, how can we also open the perspective of the participant to really consider also other SDGs that have not yet been considered in the ideas that were developed during these conferences. And therefore the students then mainly analyzed the different results with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. So with which Sustainable Development Goals are already considered in these measures, which are not. And then they developed the idea and kind of the entire script for a video, which is now used to kind of promote this youth conference and to really engage the different people into the conference. And this is unfortunately in German, but I just wanted to give you a short insight how this video now looks like. That is kind of the preparation of the next youth conference.
Das ist dein Lüneburg. Auch du kannst es mitgestalten. Das sind Sophie und Ali. Jeden Morgen fahren sie mit dem Fahrrad zur Schule. Dass die Autos so schnell fahren und auch noch die Luft verpesten, finden sie gefährlich. Straßen, auf denen Fahrräder mehr Platz haben, das ist ihr Traum. Das ist Elias. Er bemerkt, dass viele kaputte Sachen weggeschmissen werden. Eigentlich könnte man sie noch reparieren. Deshalb wünscht er sich in seiner Gegend mehr Möglichkeiten, um Dinge selbst zu reparieren. Eine Reparaturwerkstatt für alle, das ist seine Idee. Das ist Raja. Raja spielt gern Fußball. Dass die Jungs sie auf dem Bolzplatz nicht mitspielen lassen, weil sie ein Mädchen ist, findet sie unfair. Jedes Kind soll spielen dürfen, worauf es Lust hat. Niemand soll ausgegrenzt werden. Alle Kinder sollen die gleichen Chancen haben. Das wünscht sie sich. Tilly wünscht sich mehr Möglichkeiten für die Konferenz. Hier sind deine Wünsche gefragt. Du bist die Zukunft. Du entscheidest mit, wie du leben möchtest.
So this is as I said, it's kind of now used for the promotion of the conference, and in this idea of experimentation, now the idea is really to see, well, after this next conference, using this video for opening up the space, for kind of giving new ideas or directing maybe the ideas towards other SDGs, to see if this really has also changed then in the results of the youth experiment. And then we are in this loop of continuously learning how to also improve kind of this experiment. So there is much more to be said about Lüneburg 2030 plus, but I also wanted to show you a second example. And this is an example where I think an important aspect lies in it, because I think it's important to learn locally, but it's also to learn across different local experiments. And this is work that a former PhD student of mine, David Lahm, together with other colleagues around the globe, really did on the idea of amplification of sustainability solutions or sustainability initiatives. If you're interested, I'm happy to share, or we can also include this in the discussion, but the core idea of it at the end of the day really is to say, well, there are already many solutions around the world. So the future is to a certain extent already there. But the key question is really, how can we transfer and scale these solutions? And this is kind of just a categorization or typology, how we can really foster this amplification to amplify at the end of the day the impact, and in amplifying the impact of these sustainability solutions, or to contribute to larger transformations. This is a project, and it's even called, or at some places we call it Beyond Lüneburg 2030 Plus. This is a project funded by DBU, Deutsche Bundesstiftung Umwelt, German Environment Foundation, where we now have the chance to collaborate with colleagues in the Baltic countries. In Klaipėda we have kind of a collaboration. It's a community. It's Valmiera and it's Viljandi. And the key idea of this project really is to see how this concept or this idea of real-world laboratories work in different cultural contexts, and how can we really learn across these different real-world laboratories, and then the real-world experiments happening in these different real-world laboratories. You see here it's a rather complex design, so it's kind of, we have capacity building for the colleagues, or I would even say it's capacity mobilizing, and a learning together with the colleagues at the different at the different universities, but also in city municipalities and in schools. Then we have the real world experiments. We exchange and we try to evaluate this process. But in the core, it's really also there that in all of these different communities, Viljandi, Valmiera, Klaipėda, we have a setting where we work together with at least one school. Sometimes it's more than one school, where we collaborate with a university that is either in the city or that's kind of already collaborating with the city, and with actors from city administration. And together with these three actor groups, develop at least one experiment in each of these communities, implemented. And we are now in a very exciting phase where in all of these communities, the experiments are now designed and will be implemented in the next 2 to 3 to 5 months. It really depends on the community. So this is kind of what we've done. So you see, it's, there was a lot of virtual interaction. This was the one of the capacity mobilizing workshops. This is a field visit we did. This is kind of 2 people from city administration, where we have visited the place, but also developed idea. And in this community, the experiment will mainly focus on a new way how to treat green waste in the community. And this community will then mainly collaborate with school dormitories. Here you see this is in Galgstei, where Lina Bürgener, I mentioned her before, together with 2 teachers and one of the collaborators, really interacted and tried to develop or further develop the real world experiment that will happen there. This was one of the approaches. And as I said, I'm pretty excited to see that in all of the 3 Baltic cities, now the experiments are at the start and will start in spring and will be conducted over summer. As this project has a major goal to also involve the youth in the different cities, but also to create spaces for learning, we had already a strong involvement of students from Leuphana and also students from the different Baltic cities. And there was also an exchange. So we used also parts of the funding from DBU, but there was also a second funding of the Baltisch-Deutsche Hochschulkontor. So, and as we are in a UNESCO setting, I think it's also good to see that, at least from my perspective, and I'm definitely biased because I really like this project a lot, but I think this project nicely shows also how the different priority action areas of the Education for Sustainable Development roadmap, so the ESD for 2030 is the next decade we are now in, how they can be combined and how they can really contribute to transformations, to sustainability transformations. So I think it's pretty obvious that it's about the involvement of youth. So empowering and mobilizing the youth, this is one of the priorities. Then it's accelerating local level action. So this is kind of where the different experiments will mainly focusing on. But it's also creating new learning environments. So it's kind of this learning environments outside of the academic realm. And it's also kind of, at least in some of the experiments, as we involve educators, it also provides capacity development opportunities for educators. And I think that's also the beauty of transdisciplinary learning, that it's not just one aspect that is focused on, but it's really bringing also these different aspects together. So, and this leads me to my last part, and I will try to keep it short. So the last part, as I said, is really about factors for successful real-world laboratory implementation. And this is based on work that we have done as accompanying research of 14 real-world laboratories in the state of Baden-Württemberg in Germany, because there have already been now, I think, 3 or 4 major funding programs, particularly focusing on real-world laboratories. And I don't go through all of these success factors, but I tried to kind of, from a transdisciplinary learning perspective, try to highlight some of them, and then also exemplify them with a concrete example or with concrete ideas. So the first is really, this science and society. So finding the right balance between scientific and societal goals, experimenting together, and also this developing a culture of collaboration between science and society. And I brought this up because, I'm often faced with, by my colleagues, with this idea that what is happening in this real-world laboratory is not real science. And it's, this is transfer. And you talk about learning, and we are happy to contribute our insights into these learning processes, without seeing that we as scientists need to learn as much as other actors, because, it should be a continuous learning process. And there is one example which as I said, which I really also like a lot, where we collaborated with a colleague from business psychology. And the key question, this was the first study we did together with Take a Coffee, which is a association who really tries to pay fair prices with the idea of community extended agriculture, community supported agriculture, international community supported agriculture. And the question of the study really was, well, how can we connect actors across the international international supply chain? So, we work in real-world laboratories, it's place-based, but if we talk about coffee, we can't only think about coffee. And the question really was, well, how can we connect 2 places to each other? And how can we create relational proximity? And what we did here was really to use a promotional video as one experiential marketing measure to have an exchange with team members who already work with Take a Coffee and the mindful coffee tasting. And then I'm happy that I can show this picture, and then real science happens, or what some people would call real science. So we really did kind of statistical analysis and could really figure out which of these experiential marketing interventions are more successful, which are kind of the mediating factors that really then lead, in this case, to a higher willingness to pay compared to a control group. That was also then published in a paper. So this is what I wanted to show, that this can really also be, or should be, part of a real-world experiment, that also disciplinary research can happen there. And the second thing I wanted to show you is that this then continued, and I think that's also a part of the success of experimentation, because we used then the insights and collaborated with another coffee in Lüneburg, Avenir Coffee, and also there I have a short video of the start of this experiment.
My name is Philip. I'm part of the Global Research Project, which is an international consortium of 7 urban living labs from pretty much all over the world. And in Lüneburg, we are working on issues of the food, water, energy nexus together with Avenir Café, which is a local coffee producer and is transitioning into becoming a roastery. And we are particularly working on the issue of transparency in the coffee supply chain and trying to figure out how we can make the efforts that Avenir is working on with regards to their sustainability impact, transparent and communicate that to customers, to other businesses, and kind of also look into how to scale these different impacts.
Hello, my name is Hannah and I'm also part of the global research project I recently joined, and I'm very excited about what we will study now together with the Café Avenir, with the coffee shop. I come from another transdisciplinary project with another coffee business, and in that project we try to find out how we can connect producers and consumers who are located in different continents via experiential marketing tools. And what we want to try to find out now in this project is how can we build upon these empirical evidences we created with the other project, and how we can use the results to adapt it to the idea of communicating transparency efforts and kind of co-design together a communication marketing kind of strategy to communicate these efforts to the consumers, but also to other businesses in the same area.
Ich bin Christine aus dem Avenir. Wir haben jetzt gerade vor ein paar Wochen die gläserne Rösterei an der Ilmenau eröffnet. Und gläserne Rösterei heißt es deswegen, weil es zum einen eben sehr viel Glas in der Front hat und man von außen nach innen reingucken kann, aufs Röstgeschehen gucken kann. Gläsern meint vor allem aber eben auch, dass wir mit der Eröffnung der Rösterei an uns auch den Anspruch formuliert haben, Transparenz herzustellen über das, was wir tun. Das heißt zum einen, wir wollen transparent machen, wo eigentlich der Kaffee herkommt, wie der produziert wird, unter was für Rahmenbedingungen, wie der gehandelt wird, zu welchen Preisen, sodass im Prinzip für die KonsumentInnen auch die gesamte Lieferkette einsehbar und nachvollziehbar wird und auch jeder und jede weiß, was ist da eigentlich in meiner Tasse, wie kommt der Preis auch zustande. Wir wollen aber auch Transparenz über unsere internen Strukturen herstellen. Wir haben uns jetzt nämlich auf den Weg gemacht in kollektive Arbeitsstrukturen und auch das wollen wir transparent machen, um auch aufzuzeigen, dass es auch andere Art und Weisen gibt, wie man wirtschaften kann und zusammenarbeiten kann.
Time is running, but I think it's really, and this is also indicated by this video, at least for me. We have learned as much from Avenir as hopefully they have learned from us, or hopefully we could have contributed also a bit to their learning process. And as Hannah mentioned, this is what came out then of this experiment is, on the one hand side, and you will see this on the webpage of Avenir Café, a coffee comic, which was one of the means to really use the insights from the other experiment to foster this transparency. And then we also did a study, and this is currently we are investigating and analyzing the results, where we again tried out. So we had again the coffee tasting. You have seen this, but this time it was besides the video that is here, it was also this this comic that we have presented. And in the next presentation, I can then also show you the results. So it's really also this idea of continuing and using the results to create this, what I've previously mentioned, this societal impact. So, and this will be my last part, as this professorship is a professor, the chair is the chair for higher education for sustainable development. So also in this real world laboratories, a key idea is really to provide research-based learning environments. And kind of this is also a factor of success. And then the first question, and there are colleagues of mine have done a lot of research on this. Arne Wieg, Matthias Barth, Daniel Fischer, and others. So really to ask the question, well, what should we learn? What is needed? What should be learning outcomes? And this is kind of this idea of individual competence development in transdisciplinary settings, where Arne Wieg published already in 2011, based on a literature review, kind of the key competencies needed to really foster change, and that should guide kind of the different learning settings and learning interventions we are creating. So it's system thinking, future thinking, value thinking, strategic thinking, competence, and then the interpersonal competence. And we have developed several approaches how to really do this. One is the global classroom. You see this here, where we tried to combine the local and the global, but also the virtual and the real, to really engage students in a learning experience where acting, knowing, and being come together. Or there is also, and I'm happy to provide you with this booklet. This was also the outcome of a project funded by the DBU, the Transformative Innovation Lab, where then this handbook, also published in German, was co-developed among others with the Wuppertal Institute. The last two things before I come to my conclusion I want to show you is, so the question I'm often or sometimes hearing is, does project-based learning really matter? So do this experiences where students engage in concrete problems, do they matter? And there is a lot of literature also on this, but this is a study recently published by a former PhD student of mine, Jodie Bertman, and others, where she could show she followed kind of a number of students, of master students, throughout their entire learning journey. And you see here, this is kind of learning moments or activities that they reported, the students reported, where they said, well, this were the learning experience and the activities that contributed to competence development. And this is just numbers, but you see clearly that it's the project work that contributed the most for this community to their competency development. And the second question I'm facing, and I want to close with this, is kind of, can we scale this, or must this always be, you know, small groups, and we can only run small seminars? And there I'm extremely happy that I'm at a university, and that I have now the privilege to be the chairholder of this UNESCO chair, who really implemented on a large scale this idea of project-based learning, research-based learning already in the first semester for all Leuphana students starting at Leuphana. So in Leuphana, we have this Leuphana semester, besides then studying in a major and minor setting. So all students at Leuphana study almost the same study program. So they have 3 big modules they study together, and then they have 2 subject-specific modules. And one of these is transforming knowledge, responsible action, and it's also the largest module. And in this module, the students, or the main part of this module, is really a project seminar, where students, or where the goal of the seminar really is that the students get a sense of how to act responsibly in the 21st century, create Gestaltungskompetenzen, learn about cooperative research and the comprehensible presentation of the results, and really work in an interdisciplinary way together. And you know, I don't now have the examples of the project seminars because you have already seen them. So the seminar that kind of was preparing the favorable places experiment was a project seminar in this module, Research Has Responsibility, or now it's called Research Transforms. And it was also the different visions for Lüneburg 2030 plus were the results of these project seminars. So it's really about working on concrete issues, doing research on concrete issues, and then at the end of the day, present these results. And I invite you all, if you have a chance, to come to Lüneburg. So this is the time when I think Leuphana is one of the most exciting places across the world. This is exactly during this conference week. where the students of the first semester present the work of their, or the insights of their research at this conference week, where we also have exciting presentation. And particularly this year, it's interesting because this year will also be the first final of Lüneburg 2030 plus. So these were the three parts I wanted to present you. First, what is transdisciplinary learning? How can transdisciplinary learning happen in real-world laboratories? Then provide you some insights about kind of two concrete real-world laboratories, or well, real-world laboratory projects, where one is a real-world laboratory, Lüneburg 2030 plus, and then we have kind of these different real-world laboratories, or starting of real-world laboratories in the Baltics, and then kind of some deeper insights on the one hand side about how to involve scientists in these learning processes, and on the other hand, really the question how to create or use these environments for problem-based transdisciplinary learning with students. Let me end with this one, and this is also I don't show it for advertisement because this paper will be published tomorrow. And it's a paper I just wanted to encourage you to read if you're interested about, well, what should we learn as scientists, or what should I learn as a scientist, and what should we build up? And this is also again Guido Caniglia, who is a philosopher of science, and together with many colleagues, he developed this idea. Well, how can we use the old idea of practical wisdom for knowledge co-production in sustainability science? And I would argue, so this is not in this paper that you can read as of tomorrow, I think also in transdisciplinary learning. And he kind of, or the different authors use this idea of a ship, the ship that navigates through different, sometimes turbulent waters, and then there are these different aspects that could help to navigate the ship. So it's justice, giving us a direction, care. So I think we should, in all of these learning processes, we should take care of the learners, and if we are in a scientific environment, also of the different researchers. It is about humility and also courage. I don't go through the other ones, but I think this idea of a ship where we continuously learn together and kind of hopefully then have these different aspects guiding us and reminding us of how we should navigate this ship. I think that's a very nice, at least for me, way of thinking about how to navigate also sustainability transformations and transdisciplinary learning processes, helping us to navigate these transformations. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions or to engage in a discussion.
So wonderful. Thank you very much for your wonderful insights, Daniel, and for giving an overview and also some examples on how transdisciplinary learning can foster local SDG implementation in this very vivid way. And yeah, now is the time for your questions. And I already saw some in the Q&A section, so I will just start right away without wasting any time. And come back to the question of Caroline Ellerkamp. As participation and cooperation are core elements of real-world laboratory settings, isn't there also the challenge of blurred responsibilities? Did that occur in the Lüneburg 2030 example? And if yes, how can one overcome this challenge? Maybe you could respond.
Plural responsibilities.
Blurred responsibilities.
Blurred responsibilities, yes. A good question. It is a challenge. It is definitely a challenge. Who has the responsibility at the end of the day, or who takes the responsibility? And isn't it then more that you know, that it's unclear who is responsible? In transdisciplinarity, or with this idea of transdisciplinarity, we have formulated a principle in one of the papers that we have shown, and so this is often discussed. It's really a shared ownership, and therefore I think this phase A in a transdisciplinary process, and also in real-world laboratories, is super important, where we create trust and the ownership of the project at the end of the day. So this is kind of, I think, necessary. If we go to the Nella Meadows, to leverage points, I think this is a necessary prerequisite, so that we own this project together. And then it's about clear governance structures to really say, well, who is responsible for what? And there are different ways how to implement this. In Lüneburg 2030 Plus, we had, for instance, and this was not easy. But in Lüneburg 2030 Plus, or in other projects, we also have established a steering committee, and the steering committee, composed of representatives of these different groups involved, should have kind of the responsibility to then take the major decision within these projects. But it is, and another PhD student, Theresa Kampfmann, she's currently working on evaluation of different governance structures in real world laboratories. But definitely a very important point.
Perfect, thank you. One other question in the chat was by Anna Ravica. You talked about a culture of collaboration between science and society. How can this culture best be shaped by either of these actors? Maybe you could go a little bit into that.
Also a very important question. And it's an important question because it runs against so many things that are established. For instance, if we fund, so it runs fundamentally against this idea of a project funding logic that we currently still have in the research field, because it is really about trust, and it's at least this is my experience. It is long-term collaboration. So I would say Lüneburg 2030 Plus would have never happened if there wouldn't have been, and Philipp Bernhard was, for instance, he was in the video. Philipp Bernhard was already, as a student, engaged in a project before Lüneburg 2030 Plus, where they worked together with these different actors on the idea of a real-world laboratory in Lüneburg. And I have collaborated since I'm here in Lüneburg together with city administration. This is now 13 years. And I think besides all of these, trust-building activities, I think it's, the humbleness also is very important to be there, also to understand the otherness of the collaborators. I think it needs time and shared experiences. And that's, at least from my perspective, the most important one. And, and there I really argue strongly from a scientist's perspective. But as a scientist, and this runs also against the logic of how research and science is currently funded around the globe, I think, but particularly, in the environments I know, it's really to make to manage expectations, but also to acknowledge that research is not only research for publishing papers at the end of the day. And it's, there are several studies, and it's also possible to do both, publish and create scientific impact. But I think it's really hard also, particularly if you work together with early career researchers, to impose on them that you say, well, yes, do transdisciplinary research, build trust, be responsible with your actors, but at the end of the day, for the PhD, you anyhow need 4 scientific papers published. So I think there also we need, this is now the research perspective, we need to change or acknowledge this additional work of the scientists, which I think is super important facing the sustainability challenges we see at the moment.
Absolutely. There's one other question in the chat on how do you manage to keep the people involved in the real world laboratories and experiments for such a long period of time? And a second question, which also came to my head, how do you manage to get a reasonable representative image of society in the city to participate? Because often it is hard to reach those people who normally do not participate in such real-world experiments. And when designing a livable city of the future, it makes sense to involve as many parts of society as possible.
Also, 2 very important questions. So with regards to the first question, I think the first thing I had to learn is that things are changing. People are changing. I have transitioned to a different university. I'm still UNESCO chairholder at Leuphana, but now I work at KIT, which has an implication on Lüneburg 2030 plus. So it's and other people's, their lives change. So I think it's also acknowledging that the dynamics in this systems change. But I think for this long-term involvement, at least 2 things are very relevant. It's on the one hand side, it is this managing expectations, but also, managing expectations, but not managing expectations in a way to say, well, we can't produce anything for you, but to really say, well, these are the aspects that we can produce, and to really take care that as much as the focus is on scientific insights, as much should be the focus on impact. And colleagues in the TD Academy have developed a great reflexive approach to really have continuously a reflection on the societal impact of transdisciplinary research. And I think that's very important to have this. And the second one, again, I think is trust and investing enough time at the beginning to create this trust and understand each other, create a shared terminology and a governance. I think that's very important. And the second one is also a very so the sad news is you will never include everybody. And in many of these, also in Lüneburg 2030 plus, I think we haven't involved everybody, which is sad, which is definitely sad. The way we have at least tried to approach it is to there is, for instance, and we have so they have approached us, and this already shows that that you have blind spots. It's so obvious. The Integrationsbeirat in Lüneburg at a certain point approached Lüneburg 2030 plus and said, well, hello, why aren't we part of this? Why aren't we part of this project? And now with the Integrationsbeirat, we have managed to also include other parts of society in this process. But I think it's on the one hand side awareness and trying to continuously reflect upon who is involved, who is not involved, being honest that who is involved and who is not involved, and that you can't involve everybody. And this is one thing that and their science can definitely help, and to also try to have the approach that is as inclusive as possible. So do a stakeholder analysis at the beginning of such a project, to really you know, at least know who should be involved. And the last one, and this is, you know, also their funding logics, this is somehow changing, to be also aware that it's good to find ways to lower barriers for participation. You know, people sometimes simply don't have the time and the money to participate in this processes, and then find a way how to navigate this.
One other question in regard to this area is also in the Q&A section, and there is the question: do you have experience or data in how transdisciplinary learning can contribute to foster future skills for high school students from deprived backgrounds? Do you know any examples where TD, or transdisciplinary learning, is implemented in curricula in high schools? So the question on high school focus, maybe do you have an insight in that?
There, I'm very sad that Matthias Barth is not here, because, you know, I'm not really in the primary and secondary education, so I would now make things up. But you know, I'm happy to connect you with you know, with people.
Another question in the chat then maybe, Max Spiegelberg from Heidelberg asks, do the presented labs, so the labs you just presented examples, also manage to tie in powerful actors that often prevent the necessary transformation?
Also a good question.
And if so, how, probably? The second one.
Yes and no. So I think it's one interesting example is in Lüneburg 2030 plus. We have one experiment that's called Das Rad bringt's. It is about a bike delivery system, with the idea to then change kind of the entire, you know, small scale delivery in Lüneburg. And there, based on the experiment, or already from the beginning, kind of the retailers and the retailer association was involved. But there we now managed, I think one of the retailers, he was very much involved in this project. He managed that now this experiment continues, and it's carried forward with this association, which is rather powerful in Lüneburg. You know, but I think there are many learnings also in the city administration, you know, where this was then kind of placed. But I think now it trickles up kind of also in the city administration. But I think it's a very relevant question, and this is one of the things I'm very excited about. You know, I now, as I said, I'm now working also at KIT on real world laboratories. They're on one real world laboratory which is mainly focusing on mobility and on autonomous driving, and I expect, you know, that this will be other actors that I will collaborate with, and I'm really curious to learn how to involve more powerful, you know, perceived as more powerful actors, usually inhibiting sustainability transformations in this lab exercises and learning exercises.
Thank you. As time is flying, I think I will just have or take two more questions from the chat. One is, in real world experiments for local SDG implementation, what were the challenges and possibilities? Well, you in part already mentioned that one. And the second one, especially if we want to concentrate on the deep leverage points. So maybe specifying on those points, on the deep leverage points, what are the challenges and possibilities?
Well, that's good questions. So I think with regards to the deep leverage points, I think the first step really is to raise awareness and be transparent to what we are looking at. And I think it's, you know, and therefore, you know, I'm stumbling a bit, because it's, you know, it really questions our fundamental paradigms that we are living in. So you know, it's no longer asking the question, how can we make, taking the example of mobility, how can we make mobility more efficient? But it's about the question, do we need to be mobile? And I think that's, you know, this is if we talk about deep leverage points. What is the function? Why are we flying around the globe? And therefore, I think it really requires even more starting at the earlier stage. So colleagues of mine strongly argue that we need to go into this, think also more about inner transformations, use more relational approaches if we do research. And I think that's a direction that we should really foster. But you know, I'm not arguing that in the real world laboratories, I know that this is so different that it's also often about the more shallow leverage points. But I think it's, you know, making this clear. And for me, one aspect, and therefore I like also this idea of ISDL, and that, you know, this was always the idea to create learning experience across different places. So I think for me, and this is what I also experience already working with a different lab who is in the Baltics, placed in a Baltic city, and then, you know, to have it less abstract than sitting there and talking about real world laboratories. And at a certain point of time, a colleague of mine, you know, who is kind of very close to a Russian border, asked the question, and what is all of this about in times of war? You know, and then you are kind of in the midst of discussion about deep leverage points. Or if you have a South African colleague in Glokul, this project that was mentioned, and then we do our real world laboratory here in Lüneburg, and then you have a workshop in South Africa and go to a township, to an informal settlement, and they do the research there. So I think that could also be a way to more address these deep leverage points.
Maybe one last question on also handling the process, as I get it in the chat. How do you manage the balance between co-ownership and leadership in the real world laboratories and in the experiments?
Good question. So, okay, I start with the honest answer, and then I give an answer that is hopefully more helpful. You know, I think it's and this is still a risk of presentations, and maybe I should just start doing this. So we often fail in having this balance between leadership and co. You know, either it's too much leadership or it's too much co. So, you know, I could give you many examples, and I think that's always important to see. Sometimes it works, and there are success factors where it works, and other times it doesn't work. So and maybe it's a bit of a repetition, but we have even published a former postdoc of mine. She pushed this idea very strongly, and she said, you know, I previously mentioned these 3 phases. Kind of the first phase, the team composition and the definition of the joint research question, then this co-production, etc. And she said, well, there is a phase 0. There is a phase 0 where we kind of try to figure out what are kind of the ideas, what are the needs of the different people to build this trust, etc. And there is this paper on the phase 0. That we recently published, and I think this phase 0 is an important role. then it's, you know, in this governance, and I still like this, and this was at my former university, ETH Zurich, before I came to Leuphana. There were also for a long time case study research, and there it was always on each level, and I think you don't have to do it that strictly, but on each level of governance, my former boss and we tried to implement the co. So there was a co-leadership, there was on the team level, there was always a research team and a complementary team from different societal actors. There was an advisory board that was set up half and half. And I think, you know, from the experience from there and also the experience here, it doesn't need to be so strict, but having a governance that really seriously or takes the co serious, and then not say, well, but at the end of the day, it's still the scientists leading this project. I think taking this seriously, and then in the process, it might change, or it might be a bit more fluid. But starting from this idea that on each governance level, you have kind of a honest and real co, I think that's a good starting point to navigate through this.
Thank you so much, Daniel. There was one question in the Q&A function. Do you think universities should integrate projects like the ones you presented more into university teaching? Well, I guess that one should be an easy question at the end for you, or?
It's a clear yes. And I think the good thing is that many universities are on the way of doing this. So it's, I think Leuphana really has been a leader in this. So this is really a unique space, and the courage that so many people worked on this, I think that's really fantastic. But the good thing is that you see it emerging at different places. And, also if you look at if you go for the WEF, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, they did a study on what are the competencies needed of the future leaders in the world. You also see that it's similar competencies that we are describing. And I think also if you go into the educational literature, it's pretty clear that more of these projects-based learning settings are needed.
I think that was a perfect final remark. And as time is running, I would just like to thank you, Daniel, for your interesting and also inspiring lecture. And I'm sure there's a lot to come, and I'm looking forward to the further processes and everything that is still to come with regard to this approach. And also, of course, there are a lot of connecting factors to other UNESCO networks and also UNESCO sites like World Heritage Sites or biosphere reserves. So I think a lot to discuss also in the future between the German Commission for UNESCO and you. And yeah, I would like to thank all of you who have joined us here via Zoom and YouTube. Our next and last lecture of the series will take place next Wednesday by Professor Werlen from the UNESCO Chair in Global Understanding for Sustainability. So if you're interested, please have a look on our homepage, unesco.de, and check out if you're gonna be there with us next week. And yeah, so thank you very much to you, Daniel. Thank you for you who were listening, and have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much.